bouncing back, I suspect you meant it as an ironic title, didn't you? Because you haven't bounced back, have you? I mean, certainly not emotionally, and I think, in a sense, not in a career way either. How do you feel about that?
I would say welcome back, but that would be ignoring the elephant in the room. You haven't been anywhere, but this podcast has. Welcome to a returning motion racing podcast. As ever, the aim is for it to be honest, occasionally idiosyncratic, but also unabashedly a place where motorsport culture and car culture is celebrated. Not much has changed in the last 2 years, but the name you see on the screen has, and that's something I'll get into on a post on the new motion racing website, motionracing.substack.com. As we're recording this on a Sunday, it'll most likely be up in the next few days. The same goes for a piece on the return of Formula E. And of course there is no other motorsport that happened this weekend, even though some people seem to be mentioning someone called Lando Norris and a team called McLaren in hushed tones. But this podcast started out as a Formula E podcast in 2019, so I felt rebooting it with a first episode of Formula E Chat in the wake of its first race of the new 25-26 season would effectively honour what this podcast began as, while also opening the door to new and wider motorsport culture topics in later episodes. The journalist, people say, should never be the story, and that's something I try to live by when I'm doing media. But motion has always been a safe space where I talk to people I appreciate about the one thing that's been stable in my life since childhood, the joy and fun of watching motorsport. Yes, my own identity as a writer and podcaster has shifted, and it's not worth avoiding talking about that, but after a couple of years where I felt I didn't want to grow up in public, I've reached a point where I feel comfortable having fun and doing the things that used to bring me so much meaning. In addition, as I'm about to start a sim racing journey, it seems the perfect opportunity to get into podcasting and streaming about that. On occasions. So sim racing, that's a good segue into introducing today's guest, who watched the Sao Paulo E-Prix with me, Georgie Mackay. Georgie is a lifelong racing fan, even if they do try to avoid F1 these days, and is mostly found as one of the directors of Prismatic Motorsports, an all-trans and non-binary sim racing team, mostly using iRacing. If you want to know more about Prismatic, there's an archive podcast episode you can find on this feed. But the team has meant a lot to me in my own personal journey, and Georgie's a mate, so it's great to welcome you to the first episode back. Hey.
Hi, Sascha. Thanks for welcoming me back. And it is back as well because I've been on motion racing, I think, 2 other times, maybe? Or is it just once?
I think you've been on once. You may have been on the one with Jess as well, though, so maybe twice.
Yeah, I think I was on with Jess. But anyway, I'm also the proud owner of a brand new electric car, so
No way, really?
Yes, I just purchased a Peugeot E208 GT, and honestly, it's the best car I've ever driven. It's so much fun, and it's so cheap to run. And I'm driving it on the motorway every day, so it's it does the job. But that makes me more invested in Formula E than I've ever been, of course. And of course, it being a Peugeot, that means I'm now a de facto Stellantis fan. So whenever Nissan do well, or more importantly, Citroën, you'll hear from me. Especially because Citroën have both of my 2 favorite drivers in them, Nick Cassidy and Jean-Eric Vergne. So honestly, I pulled a blinder. Perfect time to buy a Stellantis brand car. Especially when they're bringing the wingless 9X8s back to Asian Le Mans series as well.
Absolutely. By the way, I mean, clearly they took the old 9X8s to the Asian Le Mans series, the team that bought the cars, to get sponsors and to get attention, and perfectly legitimate. I think it's done that. What a fabulous car that was, by the way, in its original condition. But the E208 is probably my favourite small electric car, principally because it doesn't look like an electric car.
Exactly.
And I just think Peugeot have had the styling down pat for years.
It's just gorgeous, isn't it? Everything in the interior, it's got this beautiful little GT badge on the steering wheel. Everything's carbon fiber, or at least it looks like carbon fiber. If it's plastic with a carbon fiber sticker on the top of it, I don't care. It looks good. The stitching, the Alcantara with the green stitching, it looks fantastic. Because of course I got it in the, as they call it, the Aguida yellow. the yellow that they used for the promotional shots of the car. I just couldn't stop myself after having a green Skoda Fabia. I needed something to stand out a little bit more than a white or a black car, which is pretty much all you see on the road nowadays.
Well, absolutely. And, not remotely doxing your location, but you do have to drive every day quite a long way to get to your workplace. So that must bring you some joy and thrill, being able to plug music in and just enjoy the driving experience.
And I mentioned that I drive on the motorway the whole time as well. The most fun part about it is the car is basically as efficient. In fact, I've done some testing on the motorway itself. If I don't have to slow down that much and speed up that much, the car is more efficient to put it in sport mode and just let it go. I think it's because it uses less throttle because it has more power in sport mode. The car uses 138 horsepower in its sport mode compared to I think about 75 in eco, and my guess is around 90 the normal mode, but I think it just carries its momentum a little bit better with the 138 horsepower in the sport mode on the motorway.
And there's generally the acceleration to get away from people, even in such a small car.
Exactly, that was the main reason I wanted to buy it. There are a lot of really big cars on the road nowadays, and a lot of people are a lot more aggressive than I think they realize they're being, especially when they're in such a big car. So I just want tiny car, tiny fast car, because then when those people get anywhere near me, I can be like, okay, bye, and then I'm gone. And that's what happens, and I love it.
Well, that's great, and I think we all need to grab hold of any little bit of joy we can find in life, particularly in the winter months. Before we get on to the main topic of the podcast, if you want to find me, then I'm on Blue Sky mostly these days. The Motion Racing podcast is Motion Racing, all one word, at on Blue Sky. And if you want to follow me personally, then it's Sascha Lumi, that is all one word, SASCHALUMI on Blue Sky. And the Motion Racing website, which as of the recording day does not have posts on it, but will very soon, is motionracing.substack.com. And I'm also going to throw a few from the archive articles from the past on there as well, because I think it's important to, maintain the legacy of what the website was. Anyway, let's get back to Formula E. Really looking forward to talking this through. So, actually, quick update before we do on Prismatic. So we've talked at length about Prismatic on previous episodes of the podcast, but quick thought on how the sim racing season's gone. I think you just left a race to talk to me, didn't you?
Yes, actually. We just finished the final race of our 2025 endurance season in the FTR Trophy AI Endurance Series. Was a reasonably good race for the team. Unfortunately, the pro team, the series is split up into multiple categories. There's GT3 Pro and Am, GT4 Pro and Am, and then touring car, which uses the TCR touring cars. The Athena team, which is the pro team, they had run about 4 hours and were heading around P6, which was a pretty good finish, or rather a pretty good position for them, because Cassandra was driving the car on her own and isn't actually classified as a pro driver. She's technically an AM driver on her rating, but she was doing really well. The Minerva car, our amateur car, had a bit of an issue towards the start of the race, but they managed to claw their way back to P5. So they were in P3 in the championship going into that race, and I think they finished P3 at the end of it. So I think that's not too bad for them. I'm not mentioning the final standings for the pro car, because the pro car really did not do that well over the course of this season. Bless. It didn't even attend all of the rounds, to be fair, so we couldn't really expect much from it. But as I say, Cass did a fantastic job yesterday to go for 4 hours, and then she had to go and have some dinner, so we let her go. We retired the pro car after 4 hours in the 6-hour race. But the touring car, the car I was driving for the Sulis team, we came P5 in race. And as a fun consequence of the way the rules work in that series, and the team 9 points ahead of us in the championship not attending that race. We gained 9 points to finish level in the standings with them. We had the same best finish of P2. They had more podiums than us. But that's not how the countback works in that series. The countback works that you have to attend the last round because the last round's finishing positions are what the countback's based on. So by virtue of them not attending, we overhauled them in the championship.
Nice.
And that results in our best finish in the Touring Car Championship in that series, up to P4 from a previous best of P5. So cannot complain at all.
Well, congratulations to Prismatic. And obviously the team tries to make sim racing fun. You know, there are, I guess, more sort of hardened, results-focused sim racing teams out there. But I'm always impressed with the results that you do put together.
We definitely, as you say, we do try to keep things fun. There's never really the you must drive this mentality coming from us, the directors, to our driver. It's very much a case of, if you want to do this, we'll put the support together for you. And they keep coming back to do these endurance events. And I mean, I drive in those endurance events, and I think that for the way that we run, I think we significantly punch above our weight.
Yeah. And what I might do as well is put some links to your team in the description in case anyone wants to, get more involved in the community. Perhaps we have some trans and non-binary, for example, listeners who would like to get involved in the team in the future. So I'll put some links in the description anyway.
Yeah, we're Prismatic Motorsports on both Blue Sky and Instagram.
Awesome. Okay, so the Sao Paulo E-Prix then. So Formula E is back to having its opening race before Christmas. It's the first time that's been the case since the Gen 2 era. And actually, it's never been a bad idea because it's distinguished Formula E from other motorsport series. With the exception, perhaps, of the, I think it was 2019 WEC Super Season that was just mental. But anyway, so starting before Christmas, it feels a bit like opening your presents early, but it's also nice to sort of have a trailer for the action that's going to happen in 2026. How did you feel watching a new season that's happening at the end of the old season?
It was, to be honest, quite confusing. I watched last season's first race last week, thinking it was this season's first race, because the terminology is so similar, because they call it because they were both the 2025 season. Last season was season 11, I believe, and they've changed the terminology that they refer to the previous seasons as opposed to this season. So that was quite confusing. But in terms of actually watching it, I think it's fantastic because they don't really have much competition. It's not like people forget about Formula E being on because they're too wrapped up in a F1 title challenge. I mean, they might have been for this race, but not going forward.
Yeah, the one thing I did point out on the podcast Discord server, which again link in description of podcast, folks, was the old Tiffany Dell jibe still sort of rings slightly true, that Formula E will always find a way to find the dullest industrial estate in any major world city it goes to, and I felt that something about the camera angles that were showing the racing somehow weren't able to capture the beauty or excitement of being in Brazil in the middle of the summer. And I don't know if that's something that is ever get-aroundable without compromising the race action on TV. Maybe I just need to accept that, they are going to city street circuits, but they're not always going to be able to convey the city on film. Maybe that's just a reality.
No, I tend to agree with you. I didn't think the camera angles were particularly inspiring last race. For the life of me, I can't remember which track it is. It's got that huge circular corner in the middle of it, and the camera angle that sweeps around that's fantastic. So I think it might just be an issue with this track in particular, but you are right. Formula E has had a bit of a history of finding the most dull parking lot or grey area of a city that it can find.
There again, the South American races in the European winter usually work really well. If you go back far enough, Punta del Este in Uruguay,
Hmm.
Absolutely beautiful place to have a race, and sand was blowing on the track and all that kind of stuff. And it's probably the first time that most people in Europe, certainly I, had ever heard of the name Punta del Este, so it worked well from a publicity point of view. Santiago had to finish their involvement in Formula E when they had the civil unrest there in 2019, but I think that the track was in parkland, and somehow that fitted in with the environmental mission of Formula E at that time in its series journey as well. And I thought that worked exceptionally well. But yeah, I think the aim was to obviously get it to, I think the most populous city in South America, if I'm not wrong, and certainly the most internationally diverse city in South America. And they've done that. And Brazil's a big market. So those are probably the clinching factors. But I just wish that they could find a way to make it seem a bit more stereotypically Brazilian on camera.
Maybe no. This I think you hit towards what I think is a larger problem with Formula E anyway, is that there's not really any build up to the events. They absolutely could put like a Brazilian carnival on the start finish straight in the run up to the event to make it, as you say, a little bit more stereotypically Brazilian. But equally, they could just have some support races, just any support races.
Yeah, and actually, there was supposed to be a support race for Formula E this season. Unfortunately, it fell through. FE did have the I-Pace trophy a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
which involved people hooning around Jaguar I-Paces around at the time, very tiny Formula E tracks, which was obviously comedy gold at the time. But I think that there is a gap in terms of Formula E support races, and I think due to the nature of the TV deals they've struck with a lot of territories, they perhaps wouldn't be able to show it anyway, unless Eurosport were to hack out some more time, for example. But yeah, for Formula E making it into an all-day show has always been a bit of a challenge for them.
Yeah. As I say, I think their best bet is going with the electric minis. Was it the Next Gen Cup that they were looking at?
Yeah.
NXT Gen Cup. I think that would have been a good support series. You're probably right. It is probably down to the coverage deals just not having the time for it. But I think as we see the cars gain range over the years, it's absolutely something that it's not just something they should be looking at, it's something they need, not only to pad out the broadcast and the day of the event, as it were, but also to encourage people to consider Formula E as a destination for their career. At the moment, Formula E is less now than it used to be, of course, but Formula E's sort of a destination for maybe 10 to 15% of the people that are getting into single-seater racing. The rest of them realistically want to get into Formula One because that's what the ladder they're getting onto is for. They're getting into Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2. You want to go to Formula One, you don't want to go to Formula E necessarily. And there's always been that joke of Formula E being the graveyard for old Red Bull drivers or old Toro Rosso drivers, you know what I mean? But I think that's definitely something that they want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, there is one driver who really is making Formula E his own, and he's pretty experienced in terms of the current grid. Jake Dennis. I first followed Jake Dennis when he was struggling at the back of the DTM in the thrown together Aston Martin Challenger of that season. And at the time I thought, my gosh, he seems talented, but he's being held back by his equipment. And over the years, he's, really built himself up from being number 2 at Andretti, and myself and my podcast guest at the time basically asking, Jake Dennis, why? He must have a good agent. Essentially being the guy who is in charge of everything he surveys at Andretti. I think, they build the team around him and he delivers. And obviously having the Porsche powertrain is going to make a big difference for him as well. But that was a cool first win. He had the better of Oliver Rowland and Nick Cassidy and the factory Porsches all race long, and it was a total class act type win. I mean, have we grown a bit lazy? Have we come to expect this of Jake Dennis by now?
As someone that historically has not necessarily been a Jake Dennis fan, I don't mean to say I dislike him. He's been relative. He's not been my guy. I'm a big Nick Cassidy fan. I always have been, and I would say kind of yes, but in a good way. Jake Dennis has gone from being relatively anonymous, as you've said, to being the guy. When he's on pole, he's going to have a realistically good shot at winning the race. And that used to be a problem in Formula E. The pole sitter, you never really wanted to be in first place. But in this race, you saw people try to take the initiative in first. I mean, especially Mortara tried to run away when he was informed of his penalty, and he ultimately didn't succeed, of course. But you saw him turn the burners on and try to go, and it was great to see him do it, because that used to be a real problem with Formula E. The peloton used to form, and nobody wanted to lead, and that was I think one of the most impressive things about this race, and moreover this generation of car, is that we have gotten away from that peloton. There is still, of course, energy saving. There's fuel saving in Formula One. That's part of motorsport now. It's about more than just raw speed. It's about using the equipment that you have, the restrictions that it has, whether that be fuel, energy, virtual energy in the case of WEC and endurance racing, etc. The best that you can make out of, and everyone has a level playing field with that. It's not a case of how much fuel can your car burn. It's how much fuel are you going to use while driving it.
Hmm.
Fuel, energy, interchangeably here. And Jake Dennis, as I say, he came from pole to win the race, which I don't think has happened before in Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo was used last year as well, and certainly the
Yeah.
pole sitter didn't win it last year.
He was the first driver to win from pole, but certainly Oliver Rowland's just behind, and last season's champion, and definitely. I think maybe this is a bit biased British media to say, but bit of a feel-good story that he actually got that title last season. And props to Hazel Southwell for pointing out that on the Formula E broadcast, he said, now I'm champion, I don't have to ever think about not being champion again. But unfortunately, he said that to broadcaster Sam Bird, who famously never won a title.
Yeah, that was I think I remember hearing that and thinking at the time, you've just said that to Sam Burt. Do you realise that? Um, it'd be as bad as saying it to Nick Cassidy, but anyway.
Nick Cassidy, who is your favourite. So I vaguely followed Nick Cassidy pre-Formula E. I knew he was one of the front runners in Super Formula and in Japanese Super GT. Other than he's a Toyota man, so he must be good. I didn't really follow him that closely, but then he came into Formula E and has pretty much always been in the contention for the championship. So what is it that makes you follow Nick Cassidy?
I've got a fun statistic for you about Nick Cassidy. And it's that actually in Formula E, he is the driver with the highest win percentage in the sport. He has won, on average, more races than anyone else, and it's over 12% of his races. On average, he wins 1 in every 8 races. Do you want to guess who the closest person to him is? The next closest person?
Uh, Go on.
It's Mitch Evans.
Okay.
Last season, super team. Absolute super team. But more broadly, the reason I like Nick Cassidy is because he's just, it just seems like a really down to earth guy. He's always relatively mild mannered. For me, he fits the stereotypical mold that Yuki Tsunoda didn't of a Japanese driver. He's just very mild mannered, does his racing, and speaks well of his team. I've always appreciated that about him. He's always spoken very well of his teams in interviews, and he's won in everything he's driven. A lot of people, I don't think, rate Nick Cassidy highly enough. We were talking about it just before this call. I think a lot of people sleep on him in considerations of sort of top 10, top 20 drivers in the world. But realistically, he's won in DTM. He's won in Formula E. As I say, he's the most on average winningest driver in Formula E. He's won Super Formula. He's won Super GT. He even won the Toyota Racing Series in New Zealand, and a lot of people rate Shane Van Gisbergen very highly. I am included in that. Shane Van Gisbergen did not win that series. He came second.
Hmm.
So, like Cassidy's had a very good career, and I would argue he's the best driver without a championship on that grid currently. And I know that might be controversial because there's a couple of really good drivers that don't have championships on that grid. But when you look at the statistics, nobody has won more races per race in Formula E than Nick Cassidy, and he's not even been there that long.
Yeah, I always think when Autosport do their end of year top 50, it's meant to be the top 50 performing drivers regardless of equipment in racing series that they cover. I guess now Autosport is a monthly thing. I don't know if they'll still do that, but anyway. And other than always putting Fernando Alonso in the top 5 regardless of what he'd done that season, I always felt there was a bit of undercoverage of really strong all-rounders, and I think Nick Cassidy falls into that bracket, doesn't he?
Absolutely, and not to derail too far to Formula One, but actually to the Nürburgring Endurance Series, where Franz Hermann does particularly well. Max Verstappen, of course, where he won his first race in the Nürburgring Endurance Series. I think Max, despite not winning the Formula One World Championship this year, has shown that he's, again, like you say, one of those great all-rounders of all time.
Yeah.
I've long been a proponent of the idea that the greatest driver of all time, and without question on this, because nobody's ever got anywhere near him, is John Surtees. He's the only person to have ever won world championships on 4 wheels and 2 wheels. Let's have it. Let's have the next one.
And actually,
Valentino, I'm looking at you.
There is an unpublished episode of the Motion Racing podcast where he is quite conspicuously mentioned. So maybe I ought to dig that out and put it online. Maybe I can make it a Substack bonus at some point. But
Deep lore.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Surtees, Mike Halewood as well. All of these people, brilliant all-rounders in a time when that really matters. I think the difference with Max Verstappen for me is, to me, it's even better because he's in a motorsport world where that's not expected, and it's definitely not a given. And I think to kind of do the small stuff and to be willing to go to the Nürburgring on a windy day and do his racing license training essentially, and not just expect to swan into GT3 and be accepted because he's a world champion.
Mm-hmm.
I think that showed the kind of humility which maybe his detractors, I'd include myself in that rank, perhaps didn't give him credit for beforehand.
I completely agree. One of the things that I would, on track for a position, Max Verstappen can be as entitled as he wants. But when it comes to an opportunity in motorsports, he is refreshingly unentitled. He didn't really seem to care that much that he had to go and do his license training for the NEC, despite being a multiple Formula One world champion. Like, there was no, well, you're obviously qualified. There was no, well, do you know who I am? Or at least it was never conveyed if he did act that way. And usually you do tend to hear about those things through the grapevine. I agree. It did show a lot of humility to be able to use a metaphor from a different sport to play a season in League Two just so you could get back to the championship.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that the Citroën team are looking to do in Formula E this season. They've got Nick Cassidy, they've got the great double champion, the only champion in Formula E, Jean-Eric Vergne, and that should be enough for success. But of course, the Maserati team that the Citroën team is basically a relabeled version of never quite achieved what their equipment or their organisation seems to, seem to make you think they should have achieved. They obviously had people like Stoffel van Dorn there. They had, you certainly couldn't knock the organisation, but I always felt Maserati were one of those manufacturers that never really took advantage of being in Formula E. They should have been the Ferrari of that particular series, and they never seemed to really step up. Maybe due to Stellantis' internal politics, because I know that company is a problematic one for the various corporate entities within it. Given that Citroën is a bit higher up the Stellantis Christmas tree, do you think that they'll get a bit more attention from the bigwigs?
I mean, I think you can already see that they are purely from the driver lineup. They've doubled down on what I would call ostensibly the best lineup on the grid this season. They, as you mentioned, they have the only two-time champion in Jean-Eric Verne, and they have, as I mentioned earlier, by percentage the winningest driver in Formula E. They've really committed to this. They've said we're putting Citroën on the grid, and we want to put our best foot forward. So we want the two best drivers we can possibly put in the car.
Yep.
And honestly, Cassidy drove well yesterday. Jean-Eric didn't drive particularly badly either. He got caught up in traffic a lot more, finished a bit lower, but I think it was a really good start to Citroën's campaign.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're going through the podcast notes a bit out of order, but just given that we've talked about Citroën, I think it's worth talking about the other end of the grid as well, because the Lola Yamaha ABT team is in its second season as the entity it currently is. As a long-time ABT man, Lucas de Grassi is there. He surprised no one by going into a characteristic flake out after a poor qualifying session. And then in the race, he essentially squeezed Edo Mortara into the wall in a manoeuvre which Mortara reacted to by saying, "That idiot again," I think.
Yeah.
And the thing that makes me wonder here is, at this stage in his career, the reason for hiring Lucas de Grassi in a driving role is to be the stable older head who brings the car home and to assist in a management capacity somehow. That was meant to be his role at Mahindra back in the day. If he's causing division if he's seemingly causing division by shouting across his management and saying, no, answer the question, as he did on camera at one point, and he's also going out and, well, seemingly taking his frustration out on the racetrack. I mean, I look across at the other Stellantis team, DS Penske, and I look at their new driver, Taylor Barnard, who's been at McLaren previously. And I think, well, Taylor Barnard's an old head, but he's 21, I think.
Yeah.
So is there really any benefit now in having an older driver to bring the thing home in Formula E?
I'm glad you bring up Taylor Barnard, actually, because Taylor Barnard, that's the perfect way to refer to him. He's an old head, but he's only 21. He's as a true rookie last season and even into this season, he's been the picture of professionalism in that series. And as you say, de Grassi, it was not a good look for him yesterday. He kind of, unfortunately for Lola, this comparison will always be drawn for them. He kind of made them look reminiscent of MasterCard Lola a little bit yesterday. It's as harsh as that sounds, it was not a good look for the Lola team. And don't get me wrong either, I'm a long time de Grassi fan. In the very first season of Formula E, when it was Abt, Audi, Schaeffler, that was the team I supported. I was a big Audi fan at the time, and I was heartbroken when de Grassi didn't win the championship in the last race of the season. I think realistically he was out of it in the second last race, but it was still mathematically possible in the last race. Shades of Verstappen and Piastri today, but no, it was not a good look for him today, and unfortunately that did not reflect very well on Lola either.
Yeah, it must be said, Lola is obviously a very different entity to what it was in 97, but yes, same name, and it is going to bring reminiscences. I think the thing about the current Lola, I was surprised when they came in as effectively powertrain whisperers, because Lola had always been about building the chassis in its previous guise. I think the fact that they are now they're doing a different thing. They're essentially building up their name for a different thing, and using Formula E as it's a bit cheaper to enter, and it's a good way to market the name. And the same thing with Yamaha, I guess. It is hard to get one's head around, but I think it reflects as well the fact that customer motorsport isn't what it was. There are very few series now where you can build a car to the regulations and enter the series without FIA approval. I think Formula 3000 was an example of where Lola did well. IndyCar, obviously. Super Formula. All of these series have become effectively one-make series for either Dallara or... Well, I think they all are Dallara now. So everything's one make, either Dallara or Tatus or something or something related. And I just think Lola got priced out of that particular market and had to try something new. I like the fact that it's Lola Yamaha, and I like the look of the car. And I think ABT have always been canny competitors, although obviously the budget is difficult these days. But yeah, do you think they add something by being on the back by being there, even though they're at the back of the grid right now?
I mean, look, every team that's on the grid, A, deserves to be there, and B, adds something to the racing. It's the less cars there are, the more boring the racing is. It's pretty simple that way. And you can see that if you watch European GT2. It's a gentleman's series, and there's maybe 8 cars, and they do, I think it was a 2-hour race at the Spa. And I was like, why are we doing this? But
Yeah.
even outside of that, Degrassi did make some good moves up the grid yesterday in attack mode. It did certainly added some flavor to the middle of the race, and at one point he looked like he could have a solid finish, and then inevitably he threw it away. But I think my main problem with Lola yesterday is they were just a bit anonymous. Other than that, I can't even bring myself to remember who their other driver is. That's
Zane Maloney. And
that's probably why.
I have to say, as much as I like Zane, I think he's got a nice personality, and he certainly performed in the junior series. The fact that we have the fact that we have certain drivers on the grid but not Stoffel Van Dorn says something about Formula E in its current kind of in-between state at the end of Gen 3, I think.
No, I agree. I was kind of surprised. For anyone that doesn't realize, Formula E, it should be in, and it kind of is, to be honest, in a racing golden age. There are as many as 8, I think, 8 world champions on the grid this year. And the only ones that are missing are the only world champions of Formula, or well, I guess Nelson Piquet Jr. wasn't technically a world champion, but he was the Formula E champion because it wasn't a world championship at the time. He's missing, obviously, and the only other champion that's missing is Stoffel Van Dorn. And I think that's sad. He's a good racer, and he's definitely better than some, without naming many names. Nick de Vries yesterday. That was a nightmare.
One of those former Formula E champions, yes.
Exactly.
And I quite rudely remarked on Blue Sky that he continues to have the judgment of a raccoon with an erection. I'll put it lightly. He went for a gap at the first corner that wasn't there. He ran into Edo Mortara, and honestly, it felt like the kind of move that I would have seen in the British Formula 4 Esports Championship, which your team competes in. Only obviously done to one of your cars, not done by one of your cars. And I looked at it and I thought, how can someone fully in control of their emotions do that kind of thing? It felt like red mist, but it's red mist also from, frankly, someone who, if you interviewed him for 8 hours, you wouldn't get anything revelatory out of him. He seems so in control of his emotions, and yet put him in a cockpit and he becomes a wild dog sometimes. What is it about Nick de Vries is the question.
Thank you for specifying that it wouldn't be our cars that would be causing the incidents like that. We try our best, but I don't know what it is with Nick. And look, I'm not a Nick de Vries hater. I'm not one of those people that thinks that he was the worst Formula One driver of all time or anything like that. I think there's a lot of recency bias when we talk about things like that. He, after all, is a world champion of Formula E. You don't win a championship by accident. He's a good driver, but we've seen plenty of good drivers over the history of motorsports have crumblings of their career very, very quickly after they have success. I mean, you don't really need to look much further than the likes of Jacques Villeneuve for that.
Well, yeah, and there may have been circumstances with Jacques, but I think Nick is unfortunate that he got his opportunity in F1 during the Drive to Survive era, where Netflix is constantly looking for a fall guy that they can sort of focus on. And there were enough 30-second interviews he did with the Netflix cameras where he said something like, where he drummed himself up because that was what he'd been told to do in his media training, and they turned it into him being arrogant or him expecting too much. And I think, unfortunately, a bit like someone who gets evicted from Big Brother in the first few episodes, he's sort of got to live with that now.
Yeah, I can say it's a shame because he came into Formula One as a relatively hot commodity. Certainly, he had a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for here? A lot of value, a lot of pedigree is as good as any. Yeah, exactly. He had a lot of pedigree coming in. He was sort of the first driver that everybody looked at and went, maybe a driver can make the jump from Formula E to Formula One. Maybe this can be a realistic thing. Maybe Formula E drivers that is how they get to Formula E. They get to Formula E before they get to Formula One, rather than, as I joked earlier, being one of the discarded Red Bull drivers that inevitably ends up there. If they can win Formula E, Nick de Vries was the first guy that really looked like he was capable of making the jump over in that direction. But then it just didn't really pan out that way, and they didn't really give him that much time either, but I don't really know if it would have gone much better if they did give him much longer, to be fair to him. Not a good look for him yesterday, certainly, after, as you say, going for a gap that never existed, and then forgetting inevitably how to perform the rejoin because he didn't come to a stop either.
Yeah, and I will admit, if you told me Mahindra driver in low percentage dive bomb, I wouldn't have guessed it would have been Nick de Vries. But and I say that as a long-time Edo Mortara fan.
Yeah, Mortar is another one. Yesterday was not a good day for him, and that doesn't say good things for Mahindra, that both of their drivers are driving like hotheads, especially not in the first race in the season,
so
in the first corner.
On this occasion, Mortara got squeezed out of the first corner when it was his corner, and he got squeezed out by de Grassi when de Grassi had nowhere to go and was carrying too much speed in. So I would blame him for previous incidents, but I would give him essentially a pass for these. What are your thoughts, though?
He did also forget to come to a stop when he was pushed off of the track.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't really forgive him for that.
Yeah, and even if the rules seem petty, you've got to follow them, which is a good way to bring us to two different reasons for penalties given to different drivers. So obviously there was a penalty given for a very serious incident that could have been life-threatening, and there were other penalties given for what seems like a relatively Karen-ish enforcing of FIA rules. But let's start with the really serious one. Pepe Marti misinterpreted or misunderstood a full course yellow, ran into two cars that were slowing, including Antonio Felix da Costa, and somersaulted over them in something that, so the reason why the FIA take this incredibly seriously, and the reason why they gave him a penalty of starting from the back of the grid next time and having 4 points on his licence, is because one of the last F1 drivers to be killed in race action was Riccardo Paletti in 1986. And that was when he ran over the top, I think, of Didier Pironi, who stalled on the grid I apologise, that was in 1982. So that's the reason why safety is taken so seriously around yellow flags and stoppages. Could we say that Marty was unsighted? It didn't seem like there was any issue with the lights on his steering wheel not working. I think we have to assume the FIA have looked at the telemetry and decided this is brain fade, but fairly serious incident for someone who's so highly rated.
So I think I have to call from my experience at sim racing when I respond to this, because one of the series that Prismatic takes part in is the European Sports Car Championship, the ESCC, and they have a very, very similar full course yellow procedure. One of the things that we noticed yesterday, and this happens every time, the race director announced that there was going to be a full course yellow before the full course yellow came into effect. He came over the radio, it was heard on the broadcast, all of the drivers in the cars will have heard it. Pepe Marti was aware cars were going to start slowing down very soon. And in our championship, in the simulator, it's a very, very specific rule. The race director will say full course yellow commencing in 3, 2, 1. And you have to be at the speed of the pit limiter by the time they finish saying the word 1. If you're not, any other team watching is free to report you and you will get a drive-through penalty. We're driving in the simulator, and I don't recall in the last 3 races anyone being penalized for doing that. When we're in the simulator, where safety, no one's going to die if we run into the back of them. That was a terrifying incident to watch yesterday. I'm going to say it again, was not a good day for Pepe Marti. It was not a good look for him from not a real racing driver's perspective, but from as we say in sim racing, the cars might not be real, but the racing is. From a racer's perspective, I think he should have had a little bit more awareness before. We saw him so close to those cars when the lights on his wheel came on. And I would imagine that the point where the lights in his wheel came on is when the full course yellow came into effect, i.e. the time when he had to be at the full course yellow speed. And he was still slowing down at that point. I don't know for sure. I don't know the ins and outs of the Formula E regulation, but that's certainly how it seems to make sense to work. I don't know why the lights on the wheel would indicate full course yellow before the full course yellow had been deployed. And if he was still slowing down, he wasn't slow enough for the full course yellow anyway.
Yeah, certainly that's how it should work. And I'm sure that he will be given some a very boring but necessary computer-based training to study over the Christmas break to make sure he's up to speed on that.
I think he'll be spending some time in the simulator.
Yeah, probably. Actually, it was a shame because Marty performed relatively well. I think he was the highest ranked newcomer on the grid. And as far as the Cooper Kiro team goes, so I've been following them since they were Neo 333, and they have done a stellar job of, gradually, quietly professionalizing that team. So, not to say they weren't professionals when they started, but they were run half out of England with the direct approval from China being needed for most of their decision making. And things started to look up when Gen 3 started and Russell O'Hagan became the de facto team boss. He is now, in actuality, the team boss. And as far as I can tell, everything is being run from their small factory. They've got 1-year-old Porsche powertrains, and they're making the best out of them. And I think it's all with Dan Ticktum, Pepe Marti's teammate, who's been with the team now for a few years. It almost feels like a reverse Nick de Vries arc in terms of Nick de Vries felt like the most corporate, quiet, professional driver for many years, and occasionally makes mistakes that dumbfound people when they think that. Dan Ticktum, from being someone who was famous for his off-colour incidents, has quietly become someone who's going to get the car on the first 2 or 3 rows of the grid, without drama. He was in the qualifying duels. Okay, he's, not that I can talk about anyone's looks, but he looks like a sideman now. But in terms of overall talent, it's almost like the rubber's hit the road. It's almost like he's now able to express the potential that everyone always said and knew he had when he was a Red Bull Junior, when he was a Williams Junior. It's great to see, at least for me. And I think it's testament to Kiro's increased professionalism and Dan Ticktum's increased professionalism that he is where he is.
I'm gonna agree and disagree with you in part. on that. I think Dan Ticktum, he's always been an incredibly fast driver, and I don't think anyone can really dispute that. He's always done well. Certainly did well in junior formula at some very difficult points in junior formula. There were some very fast drivers in the junior formulas when he was there, and certainly he does perform very well now. And even as you say, with that mullet that he's sporting right now, he does seem to be the hippie, as opposed to the Nick de Vries industry plant. But there's just always been a little bit of an issue with his attitude, and I think he still does sometimes let it get the better of him. He sometimes just says things over the radio that he does not need to say, and I think he did a little bit of that yesterday. I can't remember exactly what it was he said, but I just remember him
essentially,
annoying me a little bit.
After he'd been given a penalty for wheel spinning in the pit lane while serving his while going in to get the car repaired, he said, "Look, I'd rather just retire the car."
That was it.
Which is, I would say, honesty from a racing driver who really feels things and expresses them. But at the same time, yes, didn't help the team at that time.
It was the way his engineer replied to him immediately. We need to serve these things so we don't have to do them at the next race. It was just sort of the message his engineer was giving him was grow up. And I think that's been a bit of a telling remark towards Ticktum throughout his entire career. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say Ticktum's not a fantastic driver, but yesterday, as his teammate did, he maybe let his emotions get a little bit the better of him, and I can completely understand why. He was in a great position, and it was taken away from him. But one of the things that I disliked about Marty yesterday was the way that he was walking around throwing hands around like, who are these people? What are they doing? After ostensibly he had just driven into the back of two people by speeding under full course yellow.
I wondered how much of that was out of shock, actually, because I know that, not that there's any comparison, but I know that if I violently fall over, sometimes the first, like on an icy road or or on an icy pavement, sometimes my first reaction is to jump up in anger, like, why didn't you help me or something? And when actually it should be anger at myself for slipping over in the first place.
I mean, of course, there probably is an element of that, but it was the way that he was pointing towards the scene of the incident that made it look to me like he was angry at the people that he'd hit. And when you talk about Kiru's increased professionalism, I think unfortunately for them, they have at the moment, in terms of real time stock, as it were, they have the two kind of least professional, at least in terms of their public persona, the person that you see outside of the car. They have the two least professional drivers on the grid.
Well, it's a contentious point, but that's why we do this podcast, to have people on to speak their minds, and I appreciate that. And I would say as well, it will be interesting to see where Kiro go after this season, because although they're called Cupra Kiro, their powertrain, as I've mentioned, is an unlabeled Porsche.
Mm-hmm.
After this season, Porsche is going to have effectively a Toro Rosso. It's going to have a Porsche B team, which best guess would be that's going to take Kiro's slot on the grid. It's going to take one of the Porsche team slots. Maybe this is Andretti's way out, given that they don't seem to be particularly well sponsored, but it's going to make things difficult anyway for one of the Porsche teams. And I personally hope that Kiro will find a way to get a supply from either Porsche or somebody else. But it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for over the season.
I wouldn't be surprised if Kiro end up with yet another Stellantis brand. Does anybody want to see Alfa Romeo in Formula E? Ooh. I know I do.
And the thing is, Formula E is not Formula One. It doesn't cost nothing to take part, but comparatively, you can get a lot of publicity for not very much outlay. That was the reason why Maserati were initially so enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the greatest testaments to the series is it's not just sustainable in terms of the energy it uses, it's sustainable in terms of the financing of the teams in a lot of the case. Formula One has been dogged for years with almost all of its teams. Let's be real here, being on the brink of financial collapse. You only have to go back a few years for the Enston-based team being on the verge of financial collapse because they dramatically overpromised to Kimi Räikkönen on how much they'd pay him per point. Then you go back to Sauber, who was it Sauber that was saved by Nikita Mazepin?
It was Haas.
It was Haas that was saved by Nikita Mazepin. Who saved Sauber? Anyway,
well, so Sauber was saved by Peter Sauber, but a similar thing, yes.
They at least were in financial dire straits, and to be fair, so were Williams at the time as well. But Formula E doesn't seem to affect its teams in the same way. It doesn't seem to always be on a knife's edge, and I think that's one of the best testaments to it, especially seeing as it is truly cutting edge technology that they're using, and they're managing to make it financially sustainable for the teams at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. So I have to apologise to producer Sascha across the imaginary glass, who is tapping and reminding me that I wanted to make this podcast an hour. Classic motion racing, Motion E overrun there, but never mind. So we'll just get through the last couple of points then on the plan. One is the slightly more, not frivolous, but in my opinion, inconsistently applied penalties for wheel spinning. So the FIA has decided to go heavy this season on penalties for wheel spinning in the pit lane. Obviously, anyone who's been in a supermarket car park when someone decides to burn out their Clio knows that it doesn't feel like a safe environment to be in. Same thing if you're around a Formula E car that wheel spins in the pit lane. The clemency I would give the drivers, particularly Pascal Wehrlein and Dan Ticktum, who are two of the drivers affected by these penalties, is that the tyres on a Formula E Gen 3 are designed to be sustainable and to go a long way. That makes them rock hard, and that means it can be, in certain situations, particularly when you're thinking ahead to your lap, quite difficult to not wheel spin from a standing start. I felt that if the penalties had been the same, it might have been forgivable. The fact that the penalties were all different at different times made me wonder if this was race organisation, race management on the hoof a little bit, and it just gave a slight NAM flashback, if you like, to the 2021 season when there were lots of penalties for things that weren't actually the driver's fault. And of course, wheel spinning is the driver's fault, but there's degrees of fault, and you have to wonder, is this enough of a reason to change the outcome of the race?
Honestly, in my opinion, no. And I gave Dan Ticktum a little bit of a hard time for his response to it earlier, but I mean, I completely agree with his displeasure, shall we say, at getting a penalty for a minuscule amount of wheel spin in the pit lane, and primarily because it just pangs of. I mentioned earlier, I'm a proud electric car owner. It just pangs of people that have never driven electric cars legislating for electric cars. These cars drive significantly differently to petrol, diesel, conventional fossil fuel powered cars. The torque delivery is instantaneous and it's incredibly powerful instantaneously. Wheel spin is something that you have to be significantly more delicate on the throttle with an electric car than with a conventional fuel powered car, especially with the amounts of power they're putting down, as I say, instantaneously. With a single reduction gear, in the case of most cars that are on the road nowadays, not the case with necessarily the Formula E cars, you'll probably notice that a bit less, but the road cars, they have the benefit of their gears, rather the internal combustion engine cars, they have the benefit of their gears to spread the torque over the course of the gears. Electric cars don't really do that in the same way because it's the RPM that the motor spins up to that generates the power. So to me, especially when you add in the point that you make about the tires that Formula E use, I mean, look at them. They've got grooves cut into them. They haven't got any grip. If they had more grip, maybe if they were slicks, at least. Maybe I'd be a little bit more sympathetic to the stewards on this one, but it really does just sort of seem like they threw a penalty at him because they went, "Oh, your car made a noise." And in Formula E, I know that that's not allowed because they're electric, but I don't think this is the noise that they should be penalizing.
Something you said you'd like to see more closely stewarded, though, on the other hand, is attack mode. So tell us your thoughts on that.
Oh God, I can't remember who it was exactly, but one of the drivers yesterday completely missed not only the visuals on screen, but the paintwork. They were like half a car length, half a car width away from it when they entered it, and it still counted. And he wasn't the only one. There were multiple of them, and it happened last year. I don't know if it's a problem with the Sao Paulo track in particular, but for me, as someone that has been a fan of rallycross, when a joker, because that's ostensibly what the layout of the attack mode is, it's a joker. When a joker is set up in a track, you have to take the joker. You can't just sort of go halfway through it. Otherwise, they make you do it again. And I have seen in the past people be made to do it again, and it's just not something that I think they're really enforcing well enough at the moment. And yesterday there was a couple pretty egregious examples of it.
I think it's something to look into, the reasons why the interpretations are changing, because certainly a few years ago, when this podcast was still Formula E focused, there were many instances where drivers thought they'd triggered attack mode, but then hadn't, and basically lost 4 or 5 positions because of it. So it would be interesting to know whether they felt that that was too precise, and especially in a moving car when you're moving offline onto marbles, maybe they felt that was an issue. But yeah, it would be an interesting one to find out, and I'm not going to comment definitively until I've spoken to someone about it.
Yeah, there's just something not quite adding up quite right there. I'm not sure what it is either, but there's definitely something that's not quite working there. As you say, there has been problems in the past with drivers missing it and not thinking they had, and now there's a problem where drivers look like they're missing it, but they're not. So I think they're trying to work out the happy middle with it, and hopefully they get there. But yeah, as I say, a couple of pretty egregious examples yesterday.
All right, Georgie, I'd love to have you on again. This has been such fun, and good luck with the rest of the year with Prismatic Motorsports as well. If you want to give us a comment or give us a nice review on your favourite podcasting platform, then I'd love for you to do that. This is the Motion Racing Podcast, and you can find us on Motion Racing on Blue Sky. And there will be another edition of this, hopefully before the end of 2025. But let's keep our fingers crossed. But for now, thank you very much. It's great to have bounced back, and we'll talk to you all soon.